Hi, this is Masajati. Welcome to my podcast, Exponential Intelligence, where we start to unravel what's really happening in the world. We get to that first principle definition on why things happen and how you can have a fantastic life. With me is Dr. Eben Alexander and Karen, his lovely wife, and we're excited to have you on. Next to me is Fei, my wife here. And again, it's just going to be a great conversation. We're just going to let whatever comes up flow through and see where we go. And I think in today's society, everything is scripted. You know, we ask certain questions and so on. But I think in this scenario, if we just let it free flow, like we were before the recording here, I think people get a real, say, taste on what's really out there and who you guys really are, which is really beautiful. Does that sound good? So,
Right.
well, yeah. So for those individuals, Dr. Alexander, who don't know you, do you want to just give a little quick background on who you are?
Yeah, just very briefly, spent 15 years teaching neurosurgery to Harvard Medical School, thought I understood something about brain, mind, and consciousness. I subscribed to the materialist or physicalist model, our conventional scientific view that only the physical world exists and that the brain must somehow create consciousness. I knew that nobody understood that, but we all presumed that if we studied it enough, we get to answers. Well, I got my answer in a big way. It was during a week-long coma in November 2008 due to severe gram-negative bacterial meningoencephalitis, all lobes of my brain affected, going from 10% to 2% chance of survival. At the end of that week in coma, no chance of recovery, according to the doctors. And then I came back to this world. When I first woke up, all I knew was the spiritual journey, which of course I've described in great detail in many talks and in the book Proof of Heaven. But surrounded by family and friends that I didn't recognize. So my memories were just coming back. A big feature of my NDE was the amnesia, but that was very important, that I didn't remember events of my life, etc. But the spiritual journey should never have been able to happen, according to the medical details of my case. So anyway, I've spent 15 years since that coma working with other scientists around the world, coming up with a better model of the brain-mind relationship and nature of reality. And that's work that I do with Karen very extensively, because she has been a tremendous spiritual mentor to me. And also she's the co-author of that book, Living in a Mindful Universe. So
Beautiful.
welcome, Karen.
So Karen, what's your background? How did you get involved in spirituality and what is it called? Sacred music, or I'm sorry, what?
Sacred acoustics. Yes. Well,
Acoustics, yes.
It all started back, when I was a child, and I've had this lifelong interest in learning the ultimate truth of our existence. And so I wasn't interested in the easy answers that you just would have faith or science will get there one day. I wanted to know the truth. And so as I went through my life, I kind of rejected most belief systems that were out there. Of course, I know I have a belief system. You can't not have one, but I rejected most of the major ones people go through. But I knew that there was more. And through my reading and exploration, I discovered that direct personal experience is really the best way to find out for sure, rather than just believing someone else. So I became driven to cultivate experience. Eben was thrown into this near-death experience, but I went about it in a more systematic way. And it was sound was one of the keys to helping me really quiet the mind, to get that distracting, racing thoughts out of the way. And eventually, things like gongs, tuning forks, brass bowls, crystal bowls, and eventually the digital frequencies of binaural beats. And that's what's integrated into our sacred acoustics recordings. And I'll tell you the story of when we first met, so you know how this all came together. We were both, Eben had discovered sound. Sound was something that was significant on his spiritual journey, and he was exploring with sound to see if he could, find out more. And I was also interested in sound. So we were at the same workshop. And this was before his book came out. This was actually, but after his coma. And so when I met him, I knew he had had a near-death experience, but I had known others who'd had near-death experiences. So to me, I knew that people usually came back with a really powerful personal lesson. And so I wanted to cut right to that, ultimate truth lesson. And so I said, what was that lesson you learned? And he says, the brain doesn't create consciousness. And this confused me. It confused me. And I said, well, why would anyone think that it does? And so I didn't understand why this was his big lesson when this was something that to me was kind of silly, because I hadn't learned.
It's a fact, an accepted fact.
I hadn't learned the whole academic tradition of materialism and how this was a truth that they believed in, but it really was not a truth. It was an assumption. And it's something I never really believed. I always knew that there was I'll use the word soul, but the same as your timeless self. I've always known there's been a timeless self or soul that's a part of me. And I think many of us know this when we're born. We have this sense, and it's the teachings that sort of remove that concept and say, no, you have to kind of start over from scratch here and learn things this Western materialist scientific way. And that's why we want to know this mechanism. That's why the Western world is so fascinated with the mechanism. But I'm happy with just letting the scientists and others figure that out and just kind of find out for myself, how does the world work, and use my own and others' experiences to sort of inform that underlying belief. So
yeah, I love it. I think your scientific journey, Karen, because we might not call it science, but understanding human behavior, understanding why we're here, that I think that's a whole universal science project on its own, right? We've got 7.8 billion people. So it's the biggest project on earth here, is like, who are we? And you probably, from just to tap into you, started really young. And where most kids, for example, they shut that off, or society shuts them off, or your parents shut that piece off. For you, I think you had a really nurturing surrounding, probably your grandmother or something, that just allowed you to go, the possibilities are there for us. And whoever that was just kept feeding you that there is a bigger, grander version that we all know as a child that exists. But then, like you said, society goes, no, that's not it. This is the way it is. That's child stuff. So
yeah,
something.
it's interesting. I didn't really have anyone guiding me or mentoring me. The important thing was I didn't have anyone shutting me down. Exactly. I was allowed to explore, and no one was telling me I was right or wrong. And my parents were very permissive in that way. And but I didn't have a model. So it was really interesting to finally meet Eben, who seems to have, tapped into that source, that source that we're also interested in. And so it's been a really fun collaboration together. Our discussions are fascinating.
Awesome.
Yeah, like when I was an inquisitive child as well, and the same thing, there is not a model. There's no place to look up the truth and the answers. I think we all have. Moss has as well. He has grown up.
Oh, absolutely.
Not knowing the answers, searching answers everywhere. And Dr. Eben, I think you thought the answer was a certain way, and now your answer is completely different.
Yeah, I think with us, actually all four of us, as children, that piece of us never got shut down, even if it was forced to shut down. In certain situations, it's like we just kept it open. We kept the possibilities open for us, and I think that's why we're all talking here today, which is really beautiful. And I think that's where real science science can really understand the bigger concepts that they're trying to prove in a lab. I don't think you'll discover it in a lab. Because we're not, it goes way beyond, mechanics or the machines that test that. I think that comes like, hundreds of years later, where we can actually create machines from a different level of consciousness, by the way. So, I just want to get back into your history. So what did you do before you did sacred acoustics?
I was in the communications media industry. So for 25 years, I was doing art production, really, for print publications. And then the internet was invented. in the early 90s. And so we all shifted to digital publications. And so I was part of the print industry's revolution, really, from print to digital as it was happening. And so I learned it on the job, and I became director of technology and learned to develop websites and so on. And so, yeah, I'm very interested in media and communications.
So how did that transfer over into sound? I'm just trying to connect that link in my brain.
Well, my job was my job, and I had all the tasks that I could do, but the industry that I was contributing to, the particular topics that I was contributing to, were not really my personal interests. And so my first exit from the publishing field was to become a freelancer, and I found my own clients and developed websites with information that was more aligned with my personal values. And that really is what prepared me for the complete shift, because I was already independent from my company. And I had met Kevin Cossie, the audio engineer and mechanical and electrical engineer for Sacred Acoustics, 1 year before I had met Eben. And so it's just my personal interests that got me into the sound. And then it was Eben who encouraged us, after he was actually the first person to hear our sound besides the two of us. And he was like, oh my gosh, you have to get this out to other people so that they can learn how to generate their own experiences. He was very interested in showing people how they could find out for themselves. That was his drive. So he thought this would be a fabulous tool to do that. And so it was Eben's fault that that my career shifted into creating sound and teaching with him. I was always a behind the scenes person, never interested at all in interfacing with the public. And so that, again, is all Eben's fault, who dragged me into this. Yeah. But as it turns out, it's not as intimidating as I thought. And as long as you feel really comfortable with your topic, it's actually turned out to be
it's good.
Be fine. Yeah, despite my resistance.
Well,
Resistance is futile when it comes to Eben Alexander and myself. So.
Well, it's really beautiful. And I like what you said, as long as you're comfortable with your topic, that's where the knowledge is you. So you really don't have to say prepare and like make notes and all that stuff. You just know it, inside and out, right? So, which is really cool.
Well, Dr. Eben, so when you heard her music for the first time, what is it that attracted you to the
what
music?
was it? What was different, or what did you feel? And that was after your near death, right?
It was after the near-death experience. And it turns out in the first 2 years or so after that experience, which happened in November 2008, I spent a lot of time reading. I read about 150 books, quantum physics, spirituality, East and West, all kinds of books on consciousness and journeying, etc., trying to get some answers. And I came to realize the only way to get answers was through personal experience. I had to learn to meditate. And I heard about binaural beats. To me, it was a fascinating idea that held a lot of promise. I based that on a article in Scientific American by Gerald Oster in the early 1970s, where he described the whole process of binaural beats and the neuroanatomy. And to me, that's the magic. That's the power, is to realize that these sounds, sacred acoustics and other forms of binaural beats, are these sounds are something that is created in the lower brainstem, and that's very important to me.
Engineers are very drawn to this technology because of this kind of explanation.
Right. And so I won't go into great detail, but the bottom line is they have a way of influencing the modulation system that neuroscience currently believes is the way consciousness works in the brain. That is an ignition system in the lower brainstem that sends 40 times per second a now signal up to regulate the thalamocortical loops. I'm not going to turn this into some boring neuroscience,
Eben.
but the experience, yes, that's the important thing, is once I heard the tones that Karen and Kevin were working on, I went very, very deep. And I was used to going kind of deep on other forms of binaural beats, but for me, they would really take me to a completely new level. And then I've worked with them during this process of growth as they've progressed as a company with all of their abilities. If you look at the repertoire of possible options there on sacredacoustics.com, you realize there's a lot to it. And I have a lot of favorites there, but I've found that their work, their use of harmony and harmonic tones, their use of not only binaural beats, but monaural beats, etc. Karen can explain all that, but to me, the magic was in the mixture of how they put all this together. And I just found I could go far, far deeper. And I rely on these tones. I have some favorite go-tos every day.
But at that first experience, it was actually when he went up to New York to talk to agents, to talk to publishers with his newly found agent, who he met 1 week after we had met. He met his agent. And so then about 1 month later, he's up in New York. That's where Kevin Cossie lives. He's a born and bred Manhattanite. And so he just went right over to Eben's hotel room. And what Kevin and I had been doing is he would create the tones. We would talk about them. He would create them. And then we would listen at the same time. You know, we would text and make sure we were listening right at the same time. And then we would call each other up right after and tell each other about our experience. And that's when we found out that we sometimes could generate these shared experiences, which was fascinating. And so that's then what we were doing when Eben was up in the hotel. I was also listening with him in my other location in Maryland. And then he joined us on these three-way journeys for quite a while as he was convincing me really to make this public venture. So first, it was just a personal adventure kept between Kevin and myself, and then Eben joined us. And boy, then we had three perspectives of sometimes similar terrain. So really fascinating what you can do on your own in your exploring your consciousness, but also what you can do with someone else.
Right. That, of course, is a very important point. By doing it with Karen and with Kevin, and we're doing these simultaneously, but geographically separate, when we start having common experiences, it shows how each and every one of us, even though, for example, Karen might not necessarily visualize things quite as much as Kevin does, and I'm somewhere in the middle, Karen has ways of knowing that go beyond visualization. And what you end up finding is that you share common information in these shared journeys in what you acquire that proves that all of our different ways of perceiving that information are valid, even though they vary between us. And some of us have greater strength for just knowing, some for visualizing things, some for actually living through experiences, etc. But every bit of it contributes to our knowing. And that's where we found out in these shared journeys that there was a lot of overlap. And that's what gave me the kind of energy and interest to keep going with working with Karen and Kevin. And I couldn't wait for them to get it out to the world, because I found these personally very powerful modalities for deep conscious exploration. And of course, when we're talking about exploring consciousness, what you really mean is you're going out into the universe. You know, people think by going into their mind, you know, if you think the brain creates mind, then all you're doing is diving deep into, you know, the space between your ears. That's not what's happening, because consciousness is a far grander aspect than that. And that's what, you know, we've discovered, certainly over the last few decades of this kind of work, is this primacy of consciousness. But that's where I would say looking at the brain as a filter, and as all of us having this shared common experience at these deeper levels, that's where exploring mind and meditation can be very helpful with our interpersonal relationships, as well as finding guidance, you know, angelic guides, as well as interacting with the higher soul of other beings that we're involved with. So there's plenty of room to expand into that mental layer of the universe to enhance our living.
We actually get that, you know, we call it the mastermind in our 18-day hyper meditations, where we literally like transform people's lives in the 18 days. But you know, we start to create a mastermind. So whenever two or more individuals come together, there's literally another mind, say, that gets created. That makes sense. And on the 18 days, you know, we get hundreds of people creating that mind, and they have those shared journeys or shared experiences, which is really cool. So I think that kind of parallels with what you're saying. But, you know, Karen, so just out of what knowledge I know, and again, the tons of people I've worked on, do you think it's not just the vibration of sound, like, binaural beats or something, that the sacred acoustics is a little different for you? Is it because of the origin of the sound? Hence, you. Do you think you're the key component that makes it different?
Well,
Because
I would never think that. I would never think that. If anyone, it's Kevin. I mean, he's the one, but I'm sort of, here's an interesting way sometimes how our recordings get made. It's not just
let's
us.
get into the nitty gritty here, because I love
it's not just us. It's our connection to that guidance. And so, for example, one time Eben and I were here in Virginia, and I think we had just woken up, and I said, oh my gosh, I had this inspiration that seemed to come out of nowhere. We should do something about helping people explore past life memories.
Right.
And we're talking about that. And just within a minute or two, I get a text from Kevin, and it says, I just got a hit. We should do a time traveler. And I'm like, okay, well, here we go. That means we're both paying attention to the same kind of guidance. And so those kinds of things start to happen over and over again. And sometimes Kevin will be saying, that these beings come in and guide him. And sometimes he talks about them in funny ways. He'll say, they're so pushy, but this one's arguing for elegance. I got to listen to this one. And, it's inspired by kind of opening our connection and allowing that inspiration to come through. So I would say we're vehicles of the tones that are created, and we do make them in different ways intentionally. As Eben said, every tone is harmonically tuned to every other tone. The brainwave frequencies, the carrier tones, the background effects, the pink noise, whatever we're using. Not every producer does that. And Kevin is quite brilliant and in his abilities. It's interesting, though, as Eben was saying, Kevin is very adept at visual kind of confirmation of this, what I call the spiritual realm. And he's kind of like a materialist, or used to be kind of like a materialist in the spiritual realm, because he would say, well, if you're not seeing things during your experiences, then they're not real. You're just making them up. And that concerned me for a while, because I didn't have that same vivid vision that he would describe. And yet when we would do these shared journeys, I could describe the same things as him. And I took remote viewing courses. This really helped me gain confidence in my ability to know things without seeing them, because that's where, there's an envelope with a number on it. You're given only the number. You write down the number and kind of start to draw things, impressions like colors, feelings, and then you get shown the picture. And all of us can learn this. I was quite successful at times, and I wasn't seeing what I was drawing, but somehow it came through. So it's really good to remember that it doesn't have to be seen in the spiritual realm. That's a materialist belief that only what we can see, observe, and measure can be considered to be real. So taking that into the spiritual realm is a bit of a folly.
Well, yeah. I think the footprints are left on the physical world, though. What happens in the spiritual world?
Absolutely.
Whatever left. Yeah, it seems like Kevin, from what I'm seeing, with my abilities, basically Kevin actually sees sound.
He does. You're correct.
Yeah, which is really cool. And that's why I was saying it's like who originates, or who the origin of those sounds is really, really important. And between the two of you, obviously that synergy is there, and that's why it's a little different than, say, binaural beats, which is more mechanical. Right. Like, to put it to like Chat GPT. I mean, it can write an eloquent essay on something, but there's that thing that's missing. For example, in Chat GPT, it's the essence of the person behind it, right? So, and I think for you all, sacred sound is you have that essence, the presence of you, Kevin, and Dr. Alexander here, combined together, that is in the sound. I see a lot, like mentorship, for example. People who go, well, I'm under mentorship of this person who made $1 billion, But then over time, you see mentorship turning into chaos because you not only pick up the great knowledge that made them a billionaire or whatever that you're going to learn from, you pick up all their weird habits because what they're teaching you, their personalities, their background, their genetics and history is embedded in the teachings. So
yeah, I think you're onto something. I think our tones are definitely embedded with our energy, our collective energy, because Kevin, he needs me to kind of bring it into focus, bring it into some kind of, I call it product development as a technical term, really, but
Kevin's all over the place.
He is, and he needs kind of that focus. Yeah.
So that's beautiful. So again, I think that's really cool. And that's where I think you would like say stand out or be different than, because there's a lot of sound therapies out there. What's the difference is the essence, or what I would call the inception wave of that sound, the origin.
And plus all of us are unique. So we're going to respond to different sounds in different ways. So our sound, as much as Eben talks them up as being so wonderful for him, they're not going to have the same exact effect the same way on every person on the planet. So you got to keep looking for what works best for you.
Perfect. I just want to switch over to you, Dr. Alexander. Living a mindful universe. Okay. So, I've defined, consciousness in a certain way. I'm just wondering, for our audience, how you define consciousness, or do you have a definition, or are you still searching, or?
No, I would say consciousness is the only thing any sentient being ever experiences, the inside of their own consciousness. It's basically a dashboard that refers to a world out there and gives us some information about a world out there. But the last thing in the world to think is that what we're perceiving is some form of ultimate reality. We're not. We're simply looking at the dashboard that gives us certain clues about it all. And to me, this is a very important concept. And also I realize that there are different layers of complexity and entirely different realms that our conscious awareness can investigate. Now, most of us are used to our conscious awareness investigating this material realm in these bodies, but there's also a set of realms that we investigate, for example, in our dream space at night while dreaming, or during hypnotic regression, or during a psychedelic entheogenic substance experience, like
plant medicines or ayahuasca.
Yeah, and I was thinking ayahuasca that you had mentioned earlier, DMT.
Yeah.
So these are all various realms of mental expression. And if you listen to the words of near-death experiencers, what they basically tell you is that life review that something like 25 to 50% of near-death experiencers have is described as more real than this world. Exactly. I mean, you know what I'm talking about, Miles, for having been there. But and what I would say as a scientist is that ultimately, if we're really going to understand the universe, we need ways of cultivating our relationship with all of these various available realms. So from my perspective, meditation is the best way to really approach in a cultivating fashion, where you're trying to kind of direct the investigation and what you discover. But I think meditation is the best way to open the door to all of these realms. And that's why, to me, meditation is so important. And binaural beats are not all created equal. Very important to point out, if you just pull binaural beats off of a generator, off the web, or off of YouTube or something, don't expect that to be of the same extremely high quality as something like Sacred Acoustics, where they put months into some of these various recordings to get them absolutely just right. For 39 minutes of unbelievably powerful, multi-layered tones to take you deep and then bring you back up. I mean, it's an amazing construct that they've put together. But kudos to Karen and to her sound engineer, Kevin Cossey, for really delivering some powerful meditative tools to the world.
Yeah.
Well, I have a personal curiosity. Obviously, you're meditating and you're exploring different layers of consciousness. Have you ever met, like, have an alien contact or anything from outer space being?
Well, in my NDE, absolutely. I mean, there was a very direct vision of civilizations far, far, far more advanced than humans that were part of this process of evolution of all consciousness. So some of their information and knowledge is stuff that would ultimately be available to us if we're able to successfully kind of navigate into those layers of the primordial mind and be able to recognize. I mean, part of the problem is there's this principle of resonance, or like attracts like, where, for example, you can find your kind of soulmates and members of your soul group very easily in that soul space because of this resonance and kind of information overlap. But some of those civilizations are so completely, radically, wildly different from our kind of thinking in this world that you have to have a very kind of wide open spectrum of possibility in your mental space to be able to overlap with that kind of thing. So in other words, we're more used to things that we're kind of used to. And I was able to witness some extraordinary advanced civilizations in my NDE.
But not like one-on-one.
No.
Or from the big picture.
From a very big picture, but a very clear demonstration of kind of the spectrum of possibilities of intelligence.
But we did also, Kevin, Eben, and I did a shared journey to Arcturus. And Kevin and I are both rather fascinated with planets, and it turns out
stars.
Eben is quite an astronomer. So he was interested. And so we came up with these Arcturus frequencies. And what was so interesting when we came back from the journey and shared our experience, all of us described meeting three beings, one that was a little shorter than the other two, and that each of us were kind of taken by one of the three beings and shown a part of that civilization. And we each learned a different aspect kind of based on our personal interests. That was really fascinating. And part of me was like, we're making this up, you know, it's so natural to go there. And yet we all reported, I think all of our jaws were dropping in our respective cities when we were hearing each other describe the same thing. So, and yet we had three different then tours by our tour guides that diverged.
But there were the commonalities, and that's, of course, what gets your attention. And so it is certainly something that can be achieved also, not just in a near-death state like mine, which is kind of spontaneous, but also in a cultivated, intentional kind of journey, because we were intentionally trying to kind of follow a pathway together and hang together in that spiritual space in our discoveries. And so, yes, that kind of thing is absolutely possible with this kind of attention.
That's fascinating.
Fascinating. I have goosebumps when you're telling me about your journey. That is so cool.
Maybe you are one of them.
I don't know. I'm just always really, I'm always well, I admit I'm an alien wannabe. Must just always make fun of me. I'm so fascinated with anything alien and their messages, because like me, as searching all my life for all the human level of knowledge and everything, just it seemed limited.
Course.
Yeah, there's the physical limitation to even the highest knowings. So, but every time if I read something that's channeled from the alien world, it's so fascinating. It's just open up a whole different realm.
Yeah, the connections. See, to me, it's just logical that there's other civilizations, other humanoids, or other forms of life out there, and it makes total sense that we could connect to them through consciousness if consciousness was not created by the brain and is our fundamental substance. It just makes sense to me. And it's starting to unfold in our mainstream world. And it's fascinating to watch it because I've been reading about channelings and all the UFO literature, supposedly aliens who've been here, and whole descriptions of different species, and all that stuff is out there. And how much of it is true, I think we're starting to find out. So
yeah, I actually did a lecture. It's on YouTube. It's called Ancient Wisdom or Ancient Knowledge. You can search it up. I don't know.
Yeah, it's still on YouTube.
Yeah, do you know the title? I forgot the title.
Ancient Civilizations.
Ancient Civilizations. It literally it's a theory that explains how the past could be the future and the future could be the past.
Makes
And all that.
total
I think
sense.
you'd find it really interesting,
Yeah.
Doctor, it's really cool. It's laid out really well. And it gives you a lot of background on, again, how, advanced technologies that we're finding here physically on Earth, like, some of like the machinery, or, how they cut these massive stones or move these massive stones. It kind of starts
For the
to
pyramids. I'm always talking about this with Eben.
Yeah, it's really
And
cool.
when he talks about this coming revolution, I'm like, no, we're just rediscovering something we
Absolutely.
must have already known, because I was always fascinated by those sacred sites.
Yeah.
How did they get there? What is the story? So
Listen to that YouTube, and it's like something might actually click in with you. It's like, oh my God, that explains it.
very cool.
Right.
Yeah, we'll look for that. That'll be fun.
Well, there's certainly value in expanding the discussion beyond just, for example, near-death experiences.
Absolutely.
I realized that early on, that my NDE was very informative. In many ways, they are the tip of the spear in this revolution in scientific understanding of consciousness. But it's only by broadening our field of investigation that we start to really come to understanding. For example, in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, we go beyond, just these events like a near-death experience, but expand broadly into all manner of non-local consciousness, telepathy, remote viewing, etc., NDEs, and then bring in quantum physics, bring in philosophy of mind, neuroscience. All of it adds up to a bigger picture. And the reason I mention all this is there are some people who go so far, like Ray Hernandez, R-E-Y Hernandez, who works up in Boston. And he's written several books on what are known as the contact modalities, where they actually look at people's reported experiences, say abduction by aliens, near-death experiences, shared death experiences, all kinds of spiritual experiences, and they start to look at them through the same lens. Right. And think that we could have, future humans that we would see as extraterrestrials, but they're here trying to help us, trying to guide us forward. So it's just a bigger way of looking at consciousness, time, and space, given that our materialist mindset has been far too limited to come to any deep understanding. I think these far more expanded worldviews that accept empirical evidence from many different important channels is what will ultimately contribute to greater understanding.
I think to add along with what you just said, Doctor, is from my research and over the dozen years, is that there's got to be, what I found out is that to step outside of who you are, that's when you start to really understand how this reality works. You have to, just like Einstein said, you can't find a solution if you're in the same reality as the problem. So how can we study this reality if we're in it? We can't. We have to remove, I call it spatial referencing, by the way. You have to remove yourself. A lot of people use drugs, like psilocybin, ayahuasca, and so on, which is okay, but that's still an altered state. You're not your real self, because that's a filter that you're seeing this reality. And that's what we do here at XI, Exponential Intelligence, is literally allow you to pull yourself away from the identity that's been created by, your genetics and society and, all those things that we've learned, and step outside like a near-death experience. And then we get to see it from a different perspective. By the way, Karen, that's the way you actually resonate. You don't see yourself here in a physical form. You actually see yourself from a higher level.
I do.
Looking at your physical form, which gives you, again, a different, say, even creating different sounds that can be heard maybe at a deeper level that goes beyond, say, the physicalness of what your ears can pick up. So those are the kind of things that, say, like I'm studying, and it'd be great to connect and research more. But again, just because we're in a time-bound reality here, our time is up. Is there anything that you want to give our audience, last tidbits or last word of advice?
Well, I think we've missed one topic that should always be on the agenda, and that is, I'll tell it this way. remember the story I told you about Eben when he said that the most important thing he learned on his lesson was that the brain doesn't create consciousness.
Yes.
And I said, I was confused, but then I said, well, what about the love? Did you feel the love? And he was like, well, of course I felt the love. That was secondary in that moment to him. But it's, like a lot of near-death experiencers I've said, they talk about that love as being so intense. They just find it such a challenging concept to think that you could experience that here. And I said, well, I've experienced pretty amazing connections to this spiritual love that you guys talk about. I can't know if it's the same intensity, but it's pretty amazing. And I've gotten there through intentional meditation. And we can all tap into that love really just by learning to, you can read about love all you want. You really learn about love by experiencing it or experiencing the lack of it. But just learning to generate feelings of gratitude in the heart. That's what really started me on the pathway to really generating feelings of love within the heart, really at will. And then kind of as I'm going around in the world, I'll recognize people through that kind of resonance, as Eben says. But that love is really the substance of that consciousness. That's what we're finding. And we know as everyone's departing this world through the hospice work of Dr. Christopher Kerr, that's what they're focused on is love. Anything to do with love, that's what's going on. So my thought is, why wait until that moment that we die or have a near-death experience? Let's get more of that love into our lives here and now. So that's something I think that always bears discussing.
Well, that's kind of the ultimate message. We often say that near-death experiences are the tip of the spear in this revolution in conscious awareness that about the primacy of consciousness in the universe and the unification of that consciousness. And yet love, as Karen has pointed out, is the ultimate lesson and the ultimate substance of that binding force that brings all of that mind together in this kind of co-creative endeavor that we call existence. And you cannot deny the power of love in that. And that is why our somewhat polarized and misdirected world in the current era is due for a major kind of upgrade and change in our thinking. And that's what this revolution in the science of consciousness is bringing to the world, is acknowledgement of the reality, not only of the afterlife, but also that our souls in many cases tend to come back again and again. The scientific evidence for reincarnation is pretty much irrefutable, but it's never to be forgotten that at the heart of every bit of this is that concept of love and the love of the Creator for the creation. And each and every one of us can manifest that love in all of our interactions with our fellow beings. And that is ultimately what will change this world for the better.
Beautifully said.
Well, Karen, where can we experience your work?
Sacredacoustics.com is where you can find out about the sound. You can find more out about Eben at ebenalexander.com. And then we have a site that we created together called innersanctumcenter.com, and people can go explore that. And
that's INNER sanctumcenter.com.
Okay, we'll put it in the show note.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's been a fascinating interview, guys. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Xponential Intelligence podcast.
Thank you.
Awesome, Fei. Thanks so much. It's been great talking with you today, and hopefully we can do it again sometime.
And then we'll want to hear more from you next time.
Thank
Yes,
you.
Always focus on us.
Yes.
Yeah, next time.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So
Well, when we
it's
maybe head out towards the east, we can have a lunch or dinner or whatever. I think that'd be fascinating to.
Absolutely.
That'd be great.
And you're welcome to stay in our home if you're in this
If
area.
you're in this area, we'd love to have you.
Plenty
Oh
of
my God, we can meditate together. That's amazing.
Absolutely. I love that.
Well,
Okay, it's now
Great. Okay. Thank you all so much.